The best part of the Washington Commanders 53-man roster and the parts that need to prove the most this season. That and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Commanders fans to your Thursday episode of Locked On Commanders. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And you continue this conversation with me via Subtext. Text me straight from your phone by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And you can go one-on-one with me, your host, David Harrison, on Twitter at DHarrison82. Credential member of the media and Washington Commanders reporter for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Here with you every Monday through Friday, and sometimes a little bit extra, along with our everydayers and everydayers you already know. I'm going to tell you anyway. I appreciate you for your continued support for the program. Always appreciate you coming through. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Technically, this is your second episode of Thursday. Our ultimate NFL divisional preview dropped on Thursday afternoon as well. So if you haven't caught that, please go back and check that out. It's a great effort put on by the entire network, and you can get an entire league view of what's going on. Best quarterbacks in the divisions, most likely teams to make the playoffs in the divisions, all kinds of good stuff going on there. You can break it up in chunks. You guys know how YouTube works and audio. You can break it up as much as you need to. But on this episode of Locked On Commanders, we are going to hear from Washington Commanders tight end Logan Thomas and active roster receiver Mitchell Tinsley. But first, we're going to discuss the strongest units on the Washington Commanders 53-man roster, and we'll also talk about the units that need to prove the most this coming season. As we continue to evaluate the 53-man roster, right? The initial reactions are just those initial reactions. As we start to dive a little bit deeper into this 53-man roster, I wanted to take this episode to talk about the strongest parts of it. And then again, we'll look at the parts that I don't want to call it the weakest, but the parts that have the most to prove to us, to the media, to the fans, to themselves, to be quite honest with you, in some aspects this season. So we're going to start with the strongest position groups of the roster, right? Let's start with the good news first. And I think the strongest position group on this roster, and I think most of you agree with me, the defensive line, right? It's got to be the defensive line. It's kind of ironic when you consider, and every day as you'll remember this, our AAR of the preseason, right? So following the final preseason game of the year, not only do we do an AAR of the game kind of, but we did an AAR of the entire preseason. And in that AAR, my improve was the pass rush. It was turning pressures into sacks. Getting pressures was good, but turning pressures into sacks. Now, grain of salt was there was mostly depth players, right? We're talking about KJ Henry, who had 9 pressures according to PFF in the preseason, but no sacks, things like that, right? So really talking about depth. But if you look at the top of this position group, we all know you got the 4 first-round draft picks, right? You got John Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat, and of course, Chase Young, who is returning this season. And that's really kind of where I wanted to talk about this, was the return of Chase Young. So the Washington Commanders defensive line last year, without Chase Young for most of the season, had 3 top 25 pass rush grades among defensive linemen with 440 or more pass rush attempts in 2022. Again, that's according to Pro Football Focus. Miami Dolphins, they were the only other team to achieve the same feat of having at least 440 pass rushes across their defensive line, and 3 of those rushers making the top 25 in pass rush grades. Only Miami, only Washington can claim that right. Not Philadelphia, who had all those sacks. Nobody else can claim that, right? So between the top 3 guys, John Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat, they combined last season to tally up 168 pressures. That's more pressures than the entire Chicago Bears team. Not the entire Chicago Bears defensive line. The entire Chicago Bears team had fewer than 168 total pressures, again, according to PFF. Daron Payne, John Allen, Montez Sweat outpaced them by themselves. Don't even need to worry about James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill, the linebacker, safeties, DBs. Nobody, doesn't matter. Just those 3 guys outpaced an entire NFL team. And I understand the Chicago Bears, not exactly the greatest defense in the world last year. Not exactly the best team in the world last year, but I don't care if you're the worst team in the NFL. If you have 3 dudes outpacing your entire defense for pressures, that's really bad for you, obviously, but it's also, I think, really, really impressive by the unit that's doing the outpacing. Now, when you look at this trio against the rest of the National Football League, they're the 7th best trio in total pressures. Only San Francisco, Philadelphia, New England, Minnesota, Kansas City, and Dallas got more combined pressures from their top 3 pass rushers than Washington did. And to be fair, PFF counted Micah Parsons in here. You can call him an edge, you can call him a linebacker, you can call him whatever you want. A lot of people have different names for him. But Micah Parsons had 90 by himself for the Dallas Cowboys. That's insane. And so if you take Micah Parsons out, which you can't do, he is on the field, right? So it's only fair. But if you were to take him out, obviously the rest of the Dallas Cowboys pass rushing top trio would not even hold a candle to what Washington did. Now, the good news with those 17 or those 6 teams outpacing the Washington Commanders' top pass rushing trio is that the 4th guy, when you look at the 4th best guy on those teams, San Francisco's 4th best pass rusher, 20 pressures. Philly's 43. That's pretty good. New England's 23. Minnesota's 29. Kansas City's 35. Dallas, 36. So really, you're looking at a very low, I wouldn't say very low, but a maintainable threshold for Chase Young now that he's coming back fully added to this team. We'll see if he plays week 1. That's a later conversation. But assuming that he returns fully to this team this season, he really has a fairly maintainable or manageable bar to cross in order to help make this trio the best quartet in the National Football League. Almost forgot the word for 4 guys. Now we turn to the sacks, right? The trio, Daron Payne, John Allen, Montez Sweat combined for 21 sacks in the NFL last year. That's the 7th best trio in the National Football League. Only San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Philly, of course, Philly, the New York Jets, New England, and Minnesota had a better top 3 sack getter rates. Again, this is defensive lineman, right? The 4th guy on those teams, 4 for San Francisco, 2 sacks for Pittsburgh, 9 sacks for Philly, 4 sacks for the Jets, 3 sacks for New England, 3 sacks for Minnesota. So really, if Chase Young comes through and gets, say, 4 sacks this year, that automatically puts the Washington Commanders quartet on pace to be the 2nd best foursome in sack rates in the National Football League this season compared to last season. Of course, these other teams could also improve their production as well. So just to be fair. But what's really interesting is without Chase Young for most of last year, James Smith-Williams got the most reps replacing Chase in 2022, and he racked up 24 pressures on his own and 2 sacks, which means without Chase, the Commanders' starting defensive line, if you make James Smith-Williams that guy, was arguably already the 6th best defensive line, again, without Chase Young. So that means that if Chase Young can come back and if Chase Young can be what people hope Chase Young can be, this defensive line could very well be top 5 in the National Football League easily. Top 3, top 1 is certainly within reach. So defensive line, my top unit for this Washington Commanders 53-man roster. They get the gold medal. The secondary and the receiver groups were in the running to be the 2nd best unit on the 53-man roster. Who won the silver? I'm going to tell you that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll do that thanks to our friends at FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5, you get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Right now. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. I love those stacking those props. I just absolutely love it. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day. And every day is once again, like we always do, I want to thank you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Continuing our conversation today about the strongest parts of the Commanders 53-man roster. We turn now to the receiver group, which is, I think, the 2nd best unit on this team. They get the silver medal, but it was a close competition between the secondary group and the receiver group. The secondary group coming in 3rd in my book. And honestly, it came down to the fact that 2 of the 5 starters in the secondary, if you count the slot defender as a starting defender, 2 of the 5 are new, right? So Benjamin St-Juste did start last season in the slot. So there's a little bit of quantifiable data and things we could look at there, but he played most of the season, finished his season, unfortunately injured, but also finished his season playing outside. And then of course, rookie Emmanuel Forbes is on the outside. We could try to project as much as we can what he's going to do in the National Football League. But the bottom line is Emmanuel Forbes unproven in the regular season. Benjamin St-Juste, I'll say mostly unproven, right? Again, we do have a small sample size, but it's been a minute since we saw him in the slot in a regular season NFL game. I will say during training camp, and I think during the preseason, looked better in the slot than he looked at this time last season. So I think for what that's worth, I do think there's some improvement there from Ben. I feel like the fact that I can't quantify the entire starting secondary nearly as much as I can quantify the starting receiver group, that trio, really does give them the edge. That's why I give the receiver group the second place finish and the secondary group the third place finish. If you have them flipped, I mean, it's fine. Like I said, I went back and forth on it. That's ultimately where I settled. So this starting receiver group, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel. And again, we may not see Terry McLaurin in week one. We'll talk obviously more and more about that as we get into next week's preparation. But as of right now, we're not even seeing him at practice, let alone seeing him get ready. I have a feeling that we are not going to see Terry until week 2 in Denver at the earliest, maybe not even until week 3 back home against the Buffalo Bills. But that's for later conversations. But last year, Washington's top 3 receivers all had 35 or more catches. And Jahan Dotson finished the season with 35. Again, he missed those 5 games with a hamstring injury, came back, had to ramp back up, the quarterback issues, all that stuff, right? So having a trio of receivers catch 35 or more balls, not exactly rare, right? Also doing that last year, Arizona, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Dallas, Detroit, Green Bay, Houston, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Las Vegas, the Chargers, Minnesota Vikings, San Francisco, and Tampa Bay. That's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 other teams. So 15 teams, including Washington, had receivers catch 35 or more balls. But the rest of the league didn't. Now, some of them leaned on tight ends like Travis Kelce, right? And some of them leaned on running backs. But we're talking about the receiving group in general. Only these 15 teams had receiving groups that caught 35 or more balls in their top 3 receiver groups. So I think it's not significant, but it is just kind of something to kind of quantify how good this receiver group is by itself. Now, taking that a layer deeper, the Washington Commanders receivers in general last season had to catch 92 contested balls. Well, they didn't catch them. They faced 92 contested passes from Washington Commanders quarterbacks. And we've chronicled in depth the struggles that the Washington Commanders quarterback group had last year, right? But the 92 contested targets, only 5 other teams, the Arizona Cardinals, the Dallas Cowboys, the Houston Texans, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had more contested targets in their 2022 campaign. Of those teams, including Washington, so of those 6 teams, 4 of them are going with new quarterbacks this year. Now, really 3 of them, because the Arizona Cardinals, they're not going with Kyler Murray because Kyler Murray's injured. But Kyler Murray got injured last year, and a lot of those contested targets came from other quarterbacks who are not starting for the Arizona Cardinals anymore. Feel me? So I still count them as one of the teams going with a new quarterback. Obviously, the Houston Texans are going with number 2 overall pick, CJ Stroud. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going with Baker Mayfield after Tom Brady retired. The Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings are sticking with Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins, but we can't ignore the fact that there are a lot of questions about whether or not Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins for both teams are really the long-term answer or even the next 3-year answer for each of those teams. So a lot of quarterback conversation, a lot of quarterback questions going around. Only those 2 teams choosing not to address that question this season. So with better quarterback play from the Washington Commanders, from starter Sam Howell, which we have seen so far in the preseason, in training camp, and we hope to continue to see going into the regular season, this receiving trio that is already top half in the NFL in receptions, even with one of their guys missing 5 games and having a 3-game ramp up, essentially being either out or hobbled, I'll call it, for 8 games last year, still finished in the top half of receptions in the National Football League, should climb even higher, right? So when you look at that contextualization, when you talk about the numbers and you put them in context and the fact that they're in the top half with subpar quarterback play, even solid quarterback play from Sam Howell, doesn't even have to be great, but even solid, not throwing contested passes time after time after time after time, will make this receiver group a little bit better. You're going to see improvement there. And we know how this works, right? Sam Howell is going to get a lot of credit for this receiving group getting better if he plays even solid football, he's going to get a lot of credit, and maybe his status gets a little bit inflated, which, you know what, I wouldn't even hate. But hopefully we here can keep everything on the up and up, right? So it just shows how much heavy lifting this receiver group has already been doing. Commanders fans, you already know Terry McLaurin's been doing a lot of heavy lifting since he got to the franchise, let alone last season. With a healthy Curtis Samuel last season, with Jahan Dotson coming in the first round, all three of these guys doing a lot of heavy lifting for their quarterbacks. So again, if the quarterback can carry some of that weight himself this year, which we think that he can, should be even better for that receiver group. So now let's flip over to two units that have a lot to prove here. The first one I'm going to talk about are the linebackers, the first one I'm going to talk about the offensive line. The second one I'm going to talk about is the linebackers. Now, the offensive line, I think, has the most to prove to a certain extent, because 4 of the 5 players on the offensive line are new starters to their positions. Charles Leno Jr., the left tackle, is the only returning starter, right? Left guard, Sadiq Charles is new. Center Nick Gates is new. Right guard Sam Cosmi is new. Not to the team, obviously, not to the starting lineup even, but to the starting right guard position. Andrew Wiley, the new right tackle, is brand new in all levels. Sadiq Charles, not new to the team, but new starter at left guard. So I think those 4 of the 5 guys, and then Charles Leno, how he's going to click and help those other guys continue to grow and continue to improve. Certainly a lot to prove on their table. And we know that just from the fact that literally every single day, as I'm reaching out to my subtexters practice, I'm saying, hey guys, practice about to start. Tell me what you want to know about today. Almost every day, how's the offensive line look? You know what I mean? And it's more than understandable because of how many questions there were. But I think that we all also saw this offensive line grow during training camp, grow throughout the preseason competitions. And I think that they did a pretty good job of coming together. And I think Coach Juan Castillo deserves a lot of credit for what he was able to do, because offensive line coach Travell Wharton missed a lot of training camp due to the back surgery that he had to have, or the back injury that he suffered. Travell is back. I saw him on the practice field on Thursday. Honestly, he may have been back for a couple more practices. I don't really scout the coach's attendance, but it was the first time I noticed Travell Wharton out there. So good to see him back there on the practice field. So now he's back. He and Coach Juan can hopefully make this group accelerate even better. Logan Thomas, who you're going to hear about here, or hear from here in just a little bit, talked about his confidence in the offensive line group and what he's seen from them as well. The other position group that's got something to prove, a lot to prove this season, the linebackers, right? It's hard to take Cody Barton's stats from 2022 to heart too much, because every Seahawks media member that I've talked to, and it's multiples, like I didn't even realize how many Seahawks media members I knew until Cody Barton got signed. And I'm like, I need to talk to somebody who knows Cody Barton. Oh, I know all these people. Like it was kind of an epiphany for me, a weird realization. I've never lived in the Pacific Northwest, so I don't know why I know all these guys, but I do, and they're good guys. And they all told me he wasn't a good fit for Seattle. Cody Barton was not a good fit in Seattle, but he's going to be a great fit in Washington from where they stand. So he's going to be much better. So when we look at the numbers, right, Barton had the 42nd best pass rush grade according to PFF among linebackers with 28 or more pass rushes. 42nd is not that good when you're talking about that, right? He had the second lowest pass rush rate of that group, so that puts it in context. But he also had an 11.1 pass rush win rates, which was 24th out of that group. Not very good. He had 424 run defense snaps according to PFF last season, and was 9th out of 12 linebackers that had 420 more, so near the bottom. But he only had 5 missed tackles, and he wasn't flagged at all last season, again, according to PFF. So that's the bright side, right? Of the 32 linebackers in the league that got 440 or more pass coverage snaps, Barton finished 22nd out of the 32 with a 60 PFF grade and allowed a 96.9 QBR when targeted. Not good. Not good. But again, it's hard to take those to heart, really, because every Seahawks person tells me he was not right in that scheme and they were not employing him correctly. He'll be employed better in Washington. I asked Cody Barton during training camp if he agreed with that sentiment. More so, did he feel like he was a better fit in Washington than a bad fit in Seattle? And he only chose to answer the Washington side. He said, yes, he feels like he's a better fit in Washington, which I totally get. And I don't blame him. You know what I mean? You don't want to badmouth your own old team necessarily. So, so Cody obviously feels like he's a better fit in Washington than he was in Seattle. All the media members there, not only did they think that, but they were actually happy to see Cody go somewhere else because they all think he's such a great guy. They want to see him successful. And I can vouch for the little bit that I've gotten to know him. I think he's a great guy too. He's been awesome in the locker room and off the practice field, right? So for what that's worth. But again, when you can't take the numbers to heart, but the numbers are still bad, you just kind of are where you are, right? So that's what we talk about when we have a lot to prove. Not that he's a bad linebacker, just you got to see it, right? So we'll start seeing that week one. And then obviously there's Jamin Davis, right? And Jamin Davis has been here for a little bit. He had a better run defense grade last year than Barton did. Jamin had a 66.1, but he also had one more missed tackle, 6 missed tackles, but 6 missed tackles in the entire season, not super terrible. Davis did have a 66.2 pass rush grade and a 9.7% pass rush win rate. Both of those numbers worse than Cody Barton's, all leading to a heaping pile of doubt around the linebacker position as a whole and a lot to prove. And then, of course, there's the Jamin Davis court case, which my understanding, if the rumors are true, he was back in court on Thursday. At the time of this recording, I don't have an update on that, but I'm sure that an update will be coming out. Likely, the update will be coming from Nikki Javala of the Washington Post. So if you want to keep up to date on that, certainly keep an eye on Nikki. She's been all over that story from the jump. And it certainly looks like that judge is pretty determined that Jamin Davis is going to serve some jail time. I don't know when that's going to come, but he or she, I can't remember the name of the judge, but he or she seems to be pretty determined on that. So we'll just have to see how that impacts the team. So which unit has more to prove? I say the linebackers have more to prove, but the offensive line, obviously, what they're going to prove is more important, right, to the total success of the team. So those are my 2 units that have a lot to prove. Injury news coming out of practice on Thursday. Not practicing Thursday. Terry McLaurin with a toe injury. Phidarian Mathis calf. Efe Obada patella. Practicing but injured. Logan Thomas calf. Chase Young stinger. Kendall Fuller knee. We got some updates later in the day. Phidarian Mathis and Efe Obada sent to the short-term IR, so they're not going to miss the entire season, but they are going to miss at least a chunk of the season. Efe Obada's injury, Ron Rivera described it has to do with the patella. Didn't really know the specifics, just patella, because he's not a doctor, and neither am I. So Phidarian Mathis, Efe Obada on the short-term IR. Tyler Larson, the center, defensive tackle Abdullah Anderson, both brought up from the practice squad, signed to the active roster to replace those 2 guys. And Coach Rivera also told us that practice squad defensive tackle Benning Potsai may have to pick up some slack as well. So look for him to be a week 1 practice squad call-up against the Arizona Cardinals as well. It's about Chase Young. There's a report that Chase Young may or may not be ready for week 1. Basically, Ron Rivera just said, look, the doctors are going to do what the doctors do. They got to wait till they get into next week to really see what the doctors think. There's an appointment coming up, and it's basically going to just be up to the medicals at that point. So practice starts next Tuesday. I don't think we have to get a full practice report till next Wednesday, but whenever we start getting those practice reports, obviously we will be here to drop those for you. Speaking of being here for you, tight end Logan Thomas took some time in the locker room with us, as did active roster wide receiver Mitchell Tinsley. So we're going to drop both of those interviews next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders. We've been getting some locker room time. It's regular season mode, so after practices, we get locker room time with the players. Actually, starting next week, I think we're getting locker room time before practice with the players, which is really interesting because they're going to be getting focused on practice. I think they're going to want to talk to us as much. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how that goes. But today we're going to start off with a locker room interview with Logan Thomas, a veteran tight end, talking about a lot of things, including how he feels heading into week 1's preparation and what he thinks of the offensive line.
How are you feeling?
Feel good. Feel much better. I appreciate the time that they gave me to get to the point I need to be at right now, and just excited for what next week holds and getting this thing started off.
Do you feel back to normal?
Oh yeah, I feel good. Yeah, I feel back to normal. Feels good getting my feet back under me and be out here with the guys and really start to get this thing tuned up.
Calf strains are so, they can linger in a sense. Were you happy in a sense of the rehab and where you at, and do you have to baby it still? Is there limitations?
No. I mean, after yesterday, I don't think there were any limitations. There was especially with only a whole lot few guys that we had, and getting the reps I did, I feel good.
Yeah.
No residual effects, so we're good.
You're a competitor. You always want to be out there with the guys. In that sense, how frustrating was it to miss that time?
Yeah, it was annoying. I felt like I let my tight end group down more so than anything because those guys are out there battling every day. 120, 130 reps a day between the 5 of those guys. So, that's where I really felt like I let them down. Then obviously, secondly, let down the offense not being out there. But I guess the season doesn't start in the preseason. The season starts September 10th. And I'm just happy to be a part of it, and I'm ready to go then.
If it was regular season, would it have gone differently the last few weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ron spoke to that a couple of times too. So yeah, it would have been on a different plane, especially moving forward. Moving forward with it would have been a whole lot quicker.
Any concerns about missing the time with Sam?
Oh yeah, that's one of those things that I wish I would have had. Is I got 2 weeks with him. I wish I would have had 3 or 4. But we can play catch up. We can work afterwards, work before, and get all that done.
And watching the last 2 preseason games, it seems like the O-line kind of was starting to figure each other out. Is that something you noticed from watching?
Yeah, it's continuity, man. Those guys are out there every day for 70 plays together, so they ain't got no choice but to get a feel for each other, and they did a daggone good job those last two games. I'm super proud of them, excited about how they played, and they did a really good job.
Every year in this locker room, you guys come in, some guys obviously are gone. How do you know what the locker room chemistry is going to be like? What do you kind of sense of those young guys relative to other years?
I like it, man. It's they always do a good job of weeding out the people that need to be weeded out, and bringing in the people they need to bring in. And I think the couple of people that we added brought a little bit of that tenacity, and like Nick. We needed that guy on that offensive line, and it really does a big deal for them, but also for the rest of the offensive unit. It's kind of that grit, that dirtiness that we need to have.
So much is expected of Sam on the field. What about in this room specifically? Like, what does it mean for that guy to be?
Oh yeah, we don't have any worries about Sam, man. He's a competitor. He's an athlete. Like, y'all see the quiet version of him. We get to see a little bit more of that spark. The dude only wants to do is win. He wants to be great for us, and put W's on the board, and he'll do that. So we're super excited about who he is and how he commands his locker room.
All right, once again, that was veteran tight end for the Washington Commanders, Logan Thomas, talking about a multitude of things. And I think the biggest takeaway there, the fact that he feels good, and it sure sounds like he feels confident that he's going to be ready for week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals. That would be huge, a big shot in the arm for this Washington Commanders offense. Him and Sam Howell are going to do some extra work, he said, to get in sync with the time that they missed during training camp in the preseason. So we look forward to seeing that, but also just great to see Logan Thomas coming back. I know there's been a lot of concern about whether or not he was going to be able to go. This franchise has not had great tight end injury history, so hopefully that health stays there and we get to see Logan Thomas on the field against the Arizona Cardinals. Now we'll talk to another guy who's looking to be on the field for his first NFL game this coming week, or this next week, and that is undrafted free agent rookie receiver Mitchell Tinsley.
What is it going to feel like when you take that field for the first time regular season?
Oh, it's going to feel great. I mean, this has always been my dream, honestly. Growing up, I always envisioned myself being, in this position. It wasn't how I envisioned it, but like it's everything I thought it would be. But yeah, when I get out there, I'm ready to do my part when I get out there and dominate.
How did you find out you were on the 53?
I didn't necessarily find out. I kind of was like, nobody said anything to me. I was going through the thing, my agent, had texted me, was like, congratulations, and some of the coaches saying congratulations. So that's kind of how I found out.
What was that phone call like with Mom? What were the emotions there?
She started tearing up a little bit. My family, they were all happy for me. They gave me a new call at the night before.
Well, this is obviously one step in the process, right? How does this maybe give you an extra hunger or motivation going forward?
This is only the beginning. This is a step in the right direction, but I'm nowhere near, I feel like, how good I can be or where I can get to in my game. And, but as of right now, I'm just going to roll on my team. I just want to help my team in every way I can.
How did practice feel today, just knowing that you're on the 53 and just being out there with the guys?
It felt good. I just, obviously, like I said, I just want to help my team however I can and just keep making plays and be consistent. That's the biggest thing, being consistent and keep working.
All right, that was rookie wide receiver Mitchell Tinsley coming out of Penn State, undrafted free agent. 2 Penn State receivers on this roster. One a first-round draft pick, Jahan Dotson. The other an undrafted free agent, Mitchell Tinsley. Couldn't be happier for Mitchell. Couldn't be happier for a lot of these young guys making their first NFL rosters. Again, only 46 active on game day. So Mitchell Tinsley, we'll see if he's actually active on game day. That's still to be determined. But, either way, certainly excited for him to be on the active 53-man roster. I've got some other interviews that I was able to do. I was not able to get with Dax. He wasn't in the locker room either day this week. He's still nursing a little bit of an injury, so I'm pretty sure he's just been getting treatment. And a lot of times those injured players, the team doesn't really want us talking to him too much because of all that stuff. But as soon as I see Dax, and I'm not completely sure that he's not avoiding me at this point, but I've got more than a few subtexters who have been texting me about Dax. I promise you all that he is on my list. As soon as I see him, I might just tackle him in the locker room. I won't do that because I'll get kicked out, fired, and, certainly won't help Dax Milne's injury recovery. But I will get Dax Milne on the record as soon as I can. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be back with more locker room interviews from this week's practices. We'll talk more about the 53-man roster as we get prepared for next week, our first game week of the season. We got practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So I will be back with another episode coming up shortly. In the meantime, after you watch this episode, if you haven't watched the NFL Ultimate Divisional Crossover, please go check that out. A lot of work went into that. Every host on the NFL channel is on there telling you what to expect from each division. I will tell you right now, I took a little bit more of the conservative route with the Washington Commanders. A lot of, we haven't seen it yet in the regular season. I know you probably want me on there talking my trash and doing all that stuff, but I got to keep it real. We haven't seen it in the regular season yet. So even the excitement around Sam right now, outside the one game, we haven't seen it enough yet for me to sit there and pound my chest and say, Sam's better than Dak. Sam's better than Jalen. But I think I did a good job representing Commanders coverage for you all. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you enjoyed this. In the meantime, whatever you're on, drop your comments, drop your questions in the YouTube comment section. Hit me on Twitter, email me at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com, or text me directly by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view of the day, today and every day. Every day is, again, greatly appreciate you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Thank you for making me a part of your day, part of your football routine. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.